marks the third day of our diocesan mission, and as you are probably aware, the theme this year is Peace be with you all. To be a peacemaker is to be a child of God. Every time we choose peace, we bring the love of God to those we encounter. A particular favourite prayer of mine, the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, "Make me a channel of your peace," calls us to bring love instead of hatred, light where there is darkness, and where there is despair, hope. Wherever we work for justice, we can create peace in our world. With this as our mission theme, each day we invite you to explore the theme of peace through using our mission resources. So in our mission booklet, you will find daily prayers and ideas for family time, and you'll be able to find these in your local church. You can participate through attending Mass in your parish or online. You can engage in prayer petitions online, and our online mission talks, of course, and daily reflections. You can also participate through Just a Thought on Kerry Radio. As I've already mentioned, this year's theme is Peace be with you all. And each day we are focusing on a different aspect of how peace presents itself to us in our lives. And today's focus is on working for a peaceful world. We're delighted this evening to welcome John Lannon, our guest speaker. John is CEO of the refugee and migrant support organisation Thurles, where he oversees a programme of work covering immigration and international protection, refugee resettlement, support for migrant victims of crime, integration support including education and employment, and migrant health. He has also worked in the private sector and academia before joining Thurles, and as a consultant with a number of international development and human rights NGOs. He holds an MA in Peace and Development Studies and a PhD in Human Rights Reporting and Information Management. So with that wealth of knowledge and experience, we welcome you, John. Good evening, John.
My reflections on the topic on the title there is Working for a Peaceful World, primarily shaped by the work in Doris that Ailish just described to you, supporting people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes around the world. As she said, we're a refugee and migrant support organisation. We're headquartered in Limerick, and we were founded 25 years ago, back in the year 2000. So if we set the scene maybe a little bit first and think about the numbers, and I won't burden you all with too many numbers tonight, but it is important to just bear in mind that there are 120 million people around the world who have been displaced from their homes. 43 million refugees, 68 million people who are called internally displaced people. Refugees, as I'm sure most of you know, are people forced to flee their country due to a conflict or to war or to persecution. Internally displaced people also flee for similar reasons, but they remain within their own borders. And large numbers of them are in Sudan, in Syria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, and other countries. Now, the other terms that I'm sure you've often heard include asylum seekers and international protection applicants. Well, basically, asylum seekers are individuals who are seeking international protection, whose claims to be recognised as refugees are still being processed. And then there are also stateless people, who are people without a nationality, and they are often lacking in many of the basic rights that so many people enjoy. So if we go on to peace and think about it, it's something that's to the fore in every tradition, every religion in the world. We do say peace be with you so often, so naturally to each other. In Arabic, we have salam alaikum, which is peace be upon you, salutation that's used by Muslims. The Jewish people use the salutation shalom, which also means peace, and they say it when they're meeting or partying. Om Shanti is, I guess, a Sanskrit mantra and greeting used to invoke deep inner tranquility, harmony in body and mind and spirit, quite common in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. So for individuals, I guess you could say peace is a state of harmony, of tranquility, of serenity. Sometimes we call that inner peace. It's a personal sense of calm, of emotional balance, of self-awareness brings inner peace. But we know through our work with people who are forcibly displaced that you don't have peace if you've had to escape from a country where your religious group is a persecuted minority. You don't have peace if you've lost all your family in a genocide like what's happening in Gaza right now. Or if the only way to survive was to spend the last bit of money that your family had to pay smugglers to bring you across the Mediterranean. You don't have peace if you're picked up on the streets in Minneapolis, deported violently to a country you've never even lived in. You don't have peace if you've been trafficked to Ireland to work in the sex trade. So our work in Doris is about supporting people who have come to Ireland because they had to. And in some cases, it's because they chose to come in order to find a better life. We support people on issues of immigration and residency, welfare, health, accommodation, education, employment. Um, and we assist people who are victims of racism, which sadly is all too common in Ireland today, victims of exploitation, of domestic, sexual, gender-based violence. And we advocate for systems that are fairer and more humane. Right now, we're working to try to ensure that new legislation called the International Protection Bill treats people with the dignity that everybody deserves. And that this new legislation doesn't result in people who've been traumatized by their experiences in the countries that they left or the journey that they come here in their after their arrival here in Ireland. Um, so we work towards a society where everybody is treated with dignity, where equality, respect for everyone's human rights are social norms. Um, because in a society where some people are excluded or treated differently, where they don't or they can't have their own inner peace, our communities are not peaceful places. So if you take, for example, the opposition to the presence of asylum seekers, or as I said, who are also international protection applicants, the protests cause division. People are living in fear. Um, People who came to Ireland to find sanctuary and to find their own peace, they're afraid when they walk past people shouting abuse at them. The people who have heard rumours and misinformation about asylum seekers are fearful as well. And we know that there are people working hard to sow division, to sow unrest by spreading stories intended to create fear. So, a large part of our work for a peaceful world is about countering their narratives. It's about bringing people together to remove fear, to build trust. Because without systems that are fair, that are equitable, we don't have peace. Um, we know as well that people who have grown up in disadvantaged communities here in Ireland have every right to say that systems are unfair. People who can't get proper medical care or can't find somewhere to live, they're not being treated in a manner that's fair and equitable. But what we say to people who are angry about the lack of houses and healthcare and everything else is don't target others who are also disadvantaged and fearful and just get to know them instead. Look for better services for everyone then. Work with others. That way we can have more harmonious communities and everybody benefits. Um, so I've talked about the personal or the inner peace. Um, and I just put up a little quote here from what the National Peace Academy say about social peace. Say, in the social sphere, peace requires that we actively strive to establish right relationships with others. Social peace is perceived through inquiry into our attitudes, our intentions, and actions regarding how we manage our interpersonal conflicts and differences, and how we give to and receive from others the qualities and conditions that comprise human dignity. And I'm always struck by the fact that it doesn't say right relationships with some others. It's means right relationships with all others, everyone in our communities and in our society. But if we go back to the millions of people who are forcibly displaced from their homes, this relates to some of the other icons on that image there, to the political, the institutional, ecological piece. And as we know, peace is about a lot more than the absence of war. It's about the presence of justice, of law, of good governance. And if we look around the world today, we've got growing numbers of conflicts, we've got huge inequalities, we've got a growing climate crisis, there's greed, colonization, competition for scarce resources, divisions within and between states. We see the increasing ineffectiveness of the United Nations. And these are all making countries and societies less safe, more violent. Um, Rapid changes in technology are also affecting us all, from the weapons that are being developed to the information we consume, how we interact with others, and even how societies are governed and who is wielding power. We see that today with the manner in which the heads of the large tech companies seem to be increasingly in positions of power and influence. Um, and now more than ever, we need the multilateral institutions. We need respect for international law, but these are being eroded. They're being abandoned, in fact. If we look at what Israel and the US and Russia are doing, for example, and the consequences of that for the 120 million people is that they've no security and they've no peace. You know, if you look at the fact that approximately 1.9 million Palestinians, which is about 90% of the Gaza population, were displaced at least once since October 2023, often losing family members, most of their belongings. That's an astonishing fact that 90% of the population were displaced. We also reflect on the fact that there are over 13 million displaced Syrians. Most of these are in refugee camps still in Lebanon and Jordan, despite the fact that there has been some degree of stability, or at least less conflict and persecution in Syria in the last year or so. We could also reflect on the fact that there are 10 million Ukrainians who have been forcibly displaced for their country, roughly 7 million refugees from that country globally, and an estimated 3.5 million internally displaced. About 80,000 of them are in Ireland and have established themselves, have made friends and have become friends to many of us in communities all around the country. Many of them, of course, right across the towns and the county of Kerry. So we have institutional failures that are leading to all the displacement, all the suffering that we see around the world. And as if that wasn't enough, humankind is also destroying the planet's climate and its ecosystems. And human life depends on our respect for and our stewardship of the planet. And the ecological piece is achieved by taking responsibility for the relationship we have with the natural environment, understanding our interdependence with not just everybody else, but with everything else on the planet, in the natural environment. So that certainly means there's a lot to be done when it comes to trying to achieve peace and to bring about peace. But in Doris, we try to avoid getting overwhelmed by it all, and we try to do what we can, I guess, on day-to-day basis. One of the things that always strikes us is how interconnected all of those manifestations of peace that I've spoken about are, and how interconnected those kind of things that bring about the lack of peace are. as well as working in the refugee and migrant support work with Doris, I've also been an anti-war activist for a large part of my life. I've opposed the US military use of Shannon Airport over the decades. I've questioned the obscene amounts of money being spent on weapons. And again, just another figure to reflect upon. A short while back, the US President Trump called for US defense spending to be increased to $1.5 trillion. That's 1 million euro in 2027. And he wanted that to happen for what he called, and I quote, these very troubled and dangerous times. But surely one of the things that makes the world so troubled and so dangerous is the spending of so much money on weapons and on war. This photograph that I've shown here is from Gaza, destroyed by systematic bombing and shelling for 2.5 years. We meet people regularly who have managed to get out of that situation and to get to Ireland. Some have lost all their family. They've been traumatized by their experiences. Um, and this is what military spending does. Of course, Palestinians are not the only ones affected. We meet people from Sudan, from Nigeria, from Afghanistan, Ukraine. So many countries that have been ravaged by war. Um, and people from these countries seek protection here in Ireland. In some cases, they're granted that protection here in Ireland, but for them, that's still not peace. The trauma, the memories live on. Um, but again, going back to reflecting on what we can do, we can help to bring about that peace for individuals. And we can do it one smile at a time, one welcoming act at a time. You know, we can help bring a sense of calm, that sense of emotional balance that I mentioned at the start. Um, and while as an organization, we advocate for policies that are just, but we also work to just build welcoming, open communities where everyone feels safe, everyone is included, everyone is treated with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. So I just want to finish with one very practical way. Everyone who's online here tonight can become involved and can do something. And it's called community sponsorship. And it's an initiative that we're promoting along with the Irish Red Cross, with the Irish Refugee Council, and with NASC down in Cork. And here the idea is that there's a focus on welcoming Syrian and Afghan refugees. It starts with a group of 5 ordinary people coming together, forming a community sponsorship group. And the idea is that those 4, 5, 10, whatever number of people, whether they're in a parish or in a club or just friends or neighbours or whatever, will help to source accommodation. They'll do some fundraising to help support the family to settle into the community, and they'll continue to support them for up to 18 months. There are already groups in Kerry or in formation. There's one in Dingle, Tralee, and also Listowel. And we and our friends in NASC down in Cork are happy to respond and to support if anyone would like to pull a group together. There are families waiting in the refugee camps in Lebanon to be welcomed to Ireland, to be welcomed into community. And we know from talking with people that we have helped to form groups and to welcome a family that it's an extremely rewarding experience for everyone, not just for the people who come from the refugee camp. So I'm going to leave it at that and thanks again for the invitation to be here tonight. These are our contact details at Doris. We're happy to take referrals, to take calls from anybody who's a refugee or a migrant, or supporting or helping refugees or migrants, and to give support and to assist in whatever ways we can. So thanks again for the invitation to be here tonight. I'm happy to answer questions, and I hope that some of what I said sparks some ideas and thoughts for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was a really lovely talk. I think personally, I was most struck by when I heard you say that peace doesn't mean the absence of war, but the presence of justice. I thought that was a very profound statement, and one that has plenty of food for thought in it. I was also delighted to hear that there's lots of communities in Kerry who are working towards peace, which of course I'm not surprised at. I would hope there's a lot more of it going on, in little ways and I'm sure that there are.
So lots of questions coming in for you, John, and thank you very much for your presentation. Very much appreciated. I suppose the first question is, you spoke about some of the work that Doris does in terms of legislation. Question here around what is happening day to day with the people who come in the door to you?
So we get up to maybe 30 people a day into us, some of who have scheduled appointments that are usually relating to issues to do with their immigration status or residency. Others who have appointments relating to access to education, to health, to employment. We get a lot of people who then just drop in looking for help with almost anything it could be, but we find that very often the reason people are coming to us is because they don't get help or they don't get the support that they need anywhere else. And very often that might be because their English isn't very good. They didn't get access to the services or the supports that they have an entitlement to, but they come to us to help them to try to get that access. There are language barriers sometimes. We're fortunate we have a very diverse staff and lots of volunteers, so we probably have, about 20 or more kind of languages that we would speak. I'm one of the poorer contributors in that regard, I have to say, but we've got wonderful people who can speak languages from kind of Arabic, Pashto, Dari, French, Spanish, Swahili, the languages of Southern Africa, etc., etc. So we're in a position where we can offer some degree of help by way of providing information, by signposting people to other services, and sometimes advocating on behalf of individuals. And that might be having to make a phone call to an ITRIO office, for example. But we can't always help, unfortunately, and that is a frustration for us. And that brings us back then to the advocacy piece and to saying, right, there's a policy or there's something that's fundamentally unfair here, or that's wrong, or that's blocking people from accessing what should be their entitlements, and we need to figure out how to change that.
Thank you. That's really helpful, because I suppose many of us feel, okay, we cannot do that advocacy work. But you mentioned there about kind of the smile, and it starts in a very small way. And there are people with lots of languages, maybe who could support in that regard. That's one of the questions here, is with regard to upskilling in terms of what kind of volunteers do you need most? Is it teachers, counsellors, social workers? What have you kind of a direction you could give that inquirer, please?
Yeah. So we're always very happy to have volunteers. So we've at this moment in time, we probably have maybe about 40 or so people that are volunteering with us in different capacities. One of a couple of structured kind of volunteer programs that we have include supporting at reception. So that smile and that just welcome and putting people at ease when they come in the door is one of the most important things that we do. So we want to ensure that we have people there at reception, and we ask people to volunteer for a morning or an afternoon. There's an induction program, and they help out by just at the reception area. We also have a conversational English program called Falchus Shock, which runs 1 day a week, and we have volunteers who just engage in English conversation with people to help them improve their English. We've also got volunteers who are working with us organising events and very short term on social media work as well. We've actually got volunteers just started with us now on that community sponsorship program that I mentioned as well. And we do cater for all, for all ages and for all backgrounds as well. Like, so we are very, happy with the fact that many of the volunteers we have on that conversational English Vultures Shout Club are retired teachers, for example. Some of them are. So whereas in other roles, our social media volunteers have tended to be students who've, in third level college who come in and like to do something kind of, on that front. So lots of different ways in which people can become involved with us.
And I'm conscious that, while you're in Limerick, that we have two great organisations here in the diocese, Turk and Kazi here in Killarney, who are also open to people volunteering and offering English classes and all of that. So we mightn't send them all off to Limerick. We hope
That's
some of them might do it here.
that's fair enough. We're always very happy to work with Turf and with Kazi. Yeah, I would also mention that two of our staff are actually from Kerry, and they're based down there and work most of their time remotely from County Kerry.
Perfect. That sounds good. I suppose one of the other questions that has come in here is with regard to, I suppose, those in our community who can sometimes resent people coming from abroad, feeling that the services are already stretched. And you made a great comment there earlier. People sometimes who feel disadvantaged feel that they're doubly disadvantaged then when there are more people coming into our society. Have you suggestions of how we converse about this in a way that's helpful, please?
Yes, so there is no doubt that services are already stretched, and there's no denying that the frustrations that people have with that. But I remember listening to a dentist in some of the towns in Tipperary who was interviewed once, and the way he put it was, he says, I can guarantee you that if all of the migrants or all of the asylum seekers were to leave this town in the morning, you still wouldn't be able to get a dentist appointment in the next week or 2 weeks or maybe months. So, the newcomers to Ireland are not the ones that have caused the services to be stretched. There are fundamental issues that need to be addressed in terms of improving the health services, in building more houses and and getting people off the homeless lists as well. Like, it's appalling that we've over 17,000 people who are in a state of homelessness, and those are only the ones that are accounted for and known about. We find that if you take homelessness as the example, we find that the many of the newcomers, the refugees and migrants who come to us because they're homeless and for whom we then try to advocate on behalf of with the local authorities, don't even get into the homeless services. They don't even get those services. In some cases they do, but we have to remember, people who have been recognized as refugees, they go on to what gets what's called a stamp 4. They have the same entitlements as anybody else who've been born and reared here. Not all of the same entitlements, but many of the same ones, or for Irish people who are returning here. But look, we say that it's really important that we all work together to improve the services, to improve the supports. One of the interesting things about that community sponsorship program that I mentioned was that there's a town that, again, a small little town in Tipperary that we've been working with, and we just formed community sponsorship group there. And one of the problems they had was that their school was at risk of being closed down. They could be without a primary school in the village if things continue the way they were. So they explicitly said, we want to welcome a refugee family that has young children that'll go into that primary school, that'll start, that they'll bolster our the GA club, that we'll start rearing more hurlers, that we'll be bringing more life, more vibrancy into the community. So I think we've got to start looking in terms of the positives. We don't deny the fact that there are service depletions, there are problems there, but we've got to work together to address those.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. Another question that's coming here, I suppose we saw people displaced last week in the Enniscorthy area with all the floods, but you mentioned 122 million. How do you manage not to become overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the struggle and the difficulty at global level?
We deal with one person at a time as they come in. I think that's how we deal with it, and we do get frustrated sometimes. There's no doubt about it. If the level of frustration that builds up by the time a Friday afternoon comes in our place is often quite high when we think about how overwhelming it could be. But we do remind ourselves that everything that we can do for each individual who walks through the door is important. And also everything that we can do to try to ensure that things are as good as they reasonably can be for other newcomers, for people who have been displaced who come to Ireland. And again, I'm going to throw out another figure, if you don't mind, to counterbalance that. 122 forcibly displaced people, 122 million forcibly displaced people around the world. Last year here in Ireland, the number of asylum seekers that arrived here was 13,000. 13,000 out of the 122 million. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny little fraction, but we can, it's still a small number, but we still need to do all that we can for those 13,000 and for all of the others who arrive as well, to ensure that they are first of all treated with the dignity and the respect that they deserve as other human beings, to ensure that their application for protection is assessed fairly, and then that if they do qualify as refugees, that they're allowed to get on with their lives here in Ireland.
Yeah. Well, I think you've given us a great message in terms of one person at a time, and maybe that's something each of us can take on board. Just a last comment. There's somebody here who's interested in that support for a refugee family. Did you mention there was a group in Tralee?
Yes, and our friends in NASC are the ones that have been organising that group. If there's a way for that person to give their details, if they wish to you, and you can pass them on, then I'd be very happy to connect them up with our friends in NASC and for anybody else as well. We just tend to divide the work between ourselves and NASC, and kind of, rather than fighting over Kerry, we divide it up. There's plenty of it to go around.
Thank you, John. Thank you. And as lots of people have said here, 1,000 thanks, inspirational. And yes, we will try to make a difference with every one person that we meet. So thank you very much.
And thanks for the invitation to be here.